Need some Phyrexia will be one cards? Well, you can snag them from our sponsor, Card Kingdom, over at cardkingdom.com/mtggoldfish. Hello, everyone. It's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive. And today, I'm joined by a special guest, Crim. How are you today, Crim?
I'm great, excited. This set has me hyped as all hell, so I'm really excited to talk about it.
Me too, and we're counting down our top 10 standard cards from Phyrexia, all will be one. So, like usual, we each made a list of our favorite cards. We kind of mashed them together. If you go to the article over on the website that'll link, you can see our cards combined. And one other super quick note before we jump into it. We did not include the fast lands. The lands always are C-playing standard, so they would obviously be number one in terms of what would see the most play out of the set, but we decided not to include them because they're kind of boring. But don't think that means the fast lands are bad. They're a very strong land cycle. We just don't want to have lands be number one on our standard list. So anyway, we're going to jump right into our list. Coming in at number 10, we got a card that, Grim, I know you're really high on. To me, I read this card and I think it's like an against the odds card, kind of, but I think you think it's much more than that, and that is ARCHFIEND of DROSS, our new massive 4-drop flyer. What do you think about this one, Crim?
Okay, I might be biased because of, let's think of all the other 4-mana demons, right? Abyssal Persecutor, loved it. I forgot the 4-mana one from Gatecrash, the one that eats a creature.
Desecration Demon.
Desecration Demon. I love those. We haven't had a demon good like that in a while. We had a few reiterations and they've been bad, right? But this one actually does a lot in that proliferating oil counters, things like that seem to matter this set. And then on top of that, it is kind of cute to try to see if you can gift this off in older formats. But realistically, this is just a good beater. And it is good. And on top of that, it's not just a vanilla flying for 4 mana 6/6. Which sounds funny to say.
It's not vanilla. It might kill you.
Yeah, it might kill you. It's not just another 4 mana 6/6 flyer though, because when things die on your opponent's side, the controller loses life. So they lose 2 life whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, and that is kind of big, right? In the colors that is going to be removing everything left and right. I can't imagine what this would have been like if Meat Hook Massacre were still legal in standard.
I don't even want to think about that.
This would legitimately close out a game a lot faster than like if you were to say sit and wait on not ELESH NORN, SHEOLDRED. Not that SHEOLDRED'S bad and this is better than SHEOLDRED. SHEOLDRED is still very good. But this is just a better body, and it doesn't die to the 5 damage burn spells and things like that. So it being a 6 power at 4 or 6 toughness at 4 mana, I'm super high on this card, and I'm loving that third line of text whenever something dies and opponent loses 2. So this just seems like a very aggressive clock as a mid-range instead of like a mid-rangey clock, right?
Yeah, I think that last ability is probably the biggest deal on the card. Its stats are obviously, they're obviously good. It is a creature that doesn't really do anything right away, but it is pretty far above the curve, especially with evasion. That last ability, it's a little bit, it's essentially Massacre Worm, except you don't get Massacre Worm's ETB, obviously, to kill things, but it is a very effective ability. You get this down laner playing a black deck, you got lots of removal, your opponent's sacking their Blood Tithe Harvesters or whatever. If your opponent gets low on life, this card's going to make it really risky for your opponent to do anything or turn any of your removal spells into shocks that are hitting your opponent's face. I'm still a little nervous about dying to it, but I guess as a 6/6 flyer, you get 4 turns. If you can't close out the game with 4 turns of this, I guess you deserve to die to it. And plus, as you said,
right,
we're in a proliferate standard, so there are ways to add extra counters. There's a lot of black proliferate spells. I mostly thought of this as, I want to Fateful Handoff it. I think this is probably the
Harmless
best creature to we even have Fateful Handoff in standard, so we can even build a standard version of the Harmless Offering deck. Maybe with Glissa, you have Glissa that can remove counters to speed up the Fateful Handoff to your opponent. So I'll probably build a deck like that, but maybe this is just good enough to play as a generic threat. It does have a lot of stats.
I see, Seth, you're also on the same train of thought when it comes to deck building.
you gotta give it to the opponent. That is the sweetest thing you can do with this card.
but okay, outside of kind of meme magic, I think this is just a solid threat too. So I want to see where it is. The biggest drawback and the reason why this is coming in at number 10 is that it is the 4-drop in black in a color that has an embarrassment of riches when it comes to 4-drops.
It's got to beat out Shieldred and also Sorin, basically. Those are kind of the two S tier, I think, 4-drops at the moment. So you're going to need the right build for it, or maybe you play not 4 copies of it, but I think it's got a chance to show up in some number. Well, let's move on. Number 9 on our list. We got a card that I'm actually super hyped about in Bloated Contaminator. One of the best proliferate cards, and maybe one of the best toxic cards in the set. It's just got really good stats. It's a 3-mana 4/4 with trample, and you get toxic, and when you hit your opponent, you get to proliferate. We were just talking about with the demon, like having oil counters. We have modified decks that have +1/+1 counters. We have a lot of powerful planeswalkers that have loyalty counters. So proliferating is actually very powerful, and this just has above the curve stats with a bunch of abilities stapled onto it. A little nervous that it does kind of get stonewalled by Shieldred. It's a tough world for a 4/4 when Shieldred's a 4/5. But apart from that, I feel like this is a really solid mono green stompy style creature with a lot of synergies. But Crim, what do you think about old Bloaty over there?
I actually, you wouldn't believe it, but I also really like this card.
Ooh, Crim likes a green card.
I think this card is just pretty cool. It does exactly all the things that you had mentioned. It's at a really good rate, and it does suffer from potentially getting bodied by a 4/5. But I mean, this is good enough, right? Like this, I think, is solid in a. Do you think the toxic matters? Is the question. Like, would you play this as like a mono green deck, or is this like a toxic threat, or are you trying to play this because it proliferates? I think this is just solid on the aggressive level, and whatever toxic is, if there is a toxic deck, I think this card's got to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes both ways. Like, I think definitely if you're a toxic deck, this is one of your key threats. It gives a poison counter and it proliferates the poison counters. I actually think it just has a lot of sneaky synergy in mono green. Though, if you look at what a mono green deck could look like, we got the new Experiment 1-drop. We got Ascendant Pack Leader, right. A 1-drop that gets counters. We got Gallic Reader, 2-drop that gets counters. We have the other 2-drop that puts counters on stuff when it dies. Like, you can kind of incidentally play a lot of good green cards that also happen to work with proliferate. So I think this is a really good toxic card and just like a really good mono green beatdown card, where if you ignored the toxic, I think it's still just good in mono green, even if you're not trying to poison people.
Yeah. Like green on its own, like mono green, you wouldn't. Okay, you're gonna hear this once. It's been a little weird that mono green hasn't been anywhere on the radar of like good, right? So I don't know if this card single-handedly does it, but it's starting to get there with like the artifact from the last set that has Unearth that's also putting counters on things. So yep. I don't know. There's definitely a lot of counters matter, like you had mentioned.
And, I mean, you'll see as we continue on our list, I think that green and white were two of the big winners from this. If you go by our standard list, I think those colors are overrepresented. Like, for example, number 8 on our list, we got a card that I know you're not as high on, just because it maybe doesn't line up with the meta, but I really like this card. And that is THRUN, Breaker of Silence. Our new THRUN. THRUN is another card I'm actually pretty interested in mono green, just because it's so hard to deal with. It's a 5-mana 5/5. It attacks through Shieldred with Indestructible. It's got trample, so it's not going to get chump blocked by a bunch of random tokens that are floating around. And it is so hard to kill. You really need a sweeper and edict, essentially, because you can't target it with a green spell, so it's almost better than hexproof, or very close to being as strong as hexproof. So I actually really like this card just as a good green 5-drop. Where you're talking about mono green maybe making a comeback, this is a card that is good if people are playing counter spells, and it's just a big threat that is really hard to interact with. But what do you think, Crim? Does THRUN have a chance in standard, even if Drago is not a thing? Or is this a card that's hanging out in sideboards waiting for you to break a Drago control deck?
I mean, like, this is definitely, I just don't know. I'm still not sold on this card entirely, just because I don't think it does anything other than be a 5/5. Maybe I'm wrong here, because for 5 mana though, you got to think about what else you're competing against, right? There's the big 5 mana 6/6 that gives counters, right? Whenever you play a permanent, right? From like a set or two ago.
That's true. And that card hasn't. That card we were hyped about, and it hasn't done anything yet. But maybe this is its time to shine. Yeah.
And then you have new NISSA, right? So like, there's so many things that I think are better at the 5 slot than this card. So I don't know. I mean, it hasn't sold me. It just reads like, yes, you have a 5/5, and I mean, maybe if this somehow takes off, It's finally time for Endless Detour. It's
Yes,
finally time for
a
Bant
green
Control.
spell. Yes. Oh, that's another card I was really high on that hasn't worked.
Yeah.
I mean, when I think of our standard, we're not a draw go standard, but we are a very interactive standard. Like, decks got a lot of removal. Things are dying all the time. A lot of decks do incidentally have counter spells. You see a lot of make disappears and so forth, even in non-control decks. So I think there is value just to being incredibly difficult to kill, especially with a body that can get through Sheoldred. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. If we do end up in a world where there is a draw go control deck, this will go up even higher in value. But even without that, I think this can serve a role in the mono green deck. It might not be a 4 of, maybe it's a 1 of or a 2 of, but for me, I think it offers enough upside that I like it. It's near the bottom of my list, but it is on my list of best cards in standard.
I like it out of the 75 in the sideboard, really though, because like it is great. Like, okay, you're gonna absolutely body mono blue. And outside, like, they have to have Otawara or that's it. And then then you have, of course, Grixis. Grixis will have a hard time dealing with this, but Grixis could also just beat you up, right? Like, because that's the thing. Like, they surprisingly do a lot on the board and damage. It's not like Grixis sits there and does nothing. And with the new edict and all of these things, like, I don't know. We'll see.
Well, let's keep moving on. Next on our list, we got a reprint. A reprint snuck in Phyrexian Arena. Crim, I'm very curious about this card. So this was one that just missed out on my list. I know it was on your list. My concern was, because of Feeble the Mirror Breaker and Wedding Announcement, we got a lot of enchantment hate in the format. On the other hand, Phyrexian Arena, every single time it's been in standard, it has been very good. It's been a while. It's been a long time since we've had it in standard, like 10th edition or something. So we're talking about a decade ago, but it's been good every single time. What do you think that means? Like, is this going to be worse than normal because of enchantment hate? Is it still strong in 2023? Tell us about Phyrexian Arena in standard.
Just like you had mentioned, I think this is definitely like heavily biased for me because every time I've seen it, it's been good. Yeah. Right. But like, it has to be good. It's Phyrexian Arena. I don't know about it in Commander, right? Like, you're drawing once a turn. It perfectly slides under the radar of like, well, between Fable, all these other things, right? Opponents are going to have to like use there's going to be tons of things stretching and taxing their enchantment hate, right? So I don't know. I think this just sits around and it's kind of like Fable 5 and 6.
Okay.
Right? It's like Fable 5 and 6. It doesn't make the token like you'd want it to, but it does draw the cards. It slowly accrues value. It's usually the least offensive of the other enchantments, so it may stay around. And on top of that, it could be something that's great out of the sideboard as well to help you outgrind a good amount of the grindy matchups. Invoke Despair, the one thing you can do to get around it is literally just flood the board with enchantments. Then you just sack whichever one doesn't matter. Or same like, that's how you're going to play around Invoke Despair. And you're going to probably outgrind and or be the one playing Invoke Despair. So, I don't know. This comes down early enough and just accrues a lot of value real quick.
It's so funny because I'm like the biggest Phyrexian Arena supporter. I'm the one that plays in Commander. I've played it in like modern decks. I've played it in Mono Black Devotion and like historic. So I love this card. For some reason, I'm like slightly skeptical about it this time, partly because of the enchantment hate. And the other thing that like gave me a little pause is Black's just got so many good cards. Like, you got Graveyard Trespasser, you got Gix, you got Phyrexian Flesh Gorger, we got new Glissa, which is Golgari, obviously. We even have like Gix and new Glissa that actually offer card advantage that can draw a card each turn. I still really hope there's a home for this card. I'm going to be very sad if Phyrexian Arena comes back to standard and does not see play, because I just absolutely love this card. But I am a little nervous that this is more of like a 2 of in the sideboard for the grinding matchups or something, rather than a like 4 of main deck style card in 2023.
It's definitely not going to be a 4 of. There's just no way you can load your deck up with this many that many of one card that takes a few turns to snowball, right? Yeah. But it is a nice 1 to 2 of. Whether it's in the main or in the side, we'll have to figure that out. Devotion obviously is something for like Pioneer and yada yada yada, but like this is or has been powerful, so I have to imagine it's still at least relatively playable, which is sad to hear, but like from where it once was, I do think that it is still just playable.
Well, let's move on to number 6 on our list. And this is maybe the most contentious card on our list. I believe I had this card number 2 on my list. I don't think you had this on your list at all. I'm pretty sure. And maybe I'm biased. Maybe I'm overrating this card. That is possible. We're talking about ELESH NORN, Mother of Machines. I'm all in on this card, Crim. I'm literally all in on it. If you look at my list for every format, I got ELESH NORN on it. The more I think about this card, the more I think it's actually busted. So yes, it's a Panharmonicon, but it's a Panharmonicon that hits on your opponent. It's really hard for some decks to kill because it's not going to get ossified or leyline binding or brutal cathard because it's shutting down the ETB triggers. It has a ridiculously big butt, which is going to shut down every ground creature. Look at anything we talked about on this list outside of Sheoldred because of Death Touch, but it literally shuts down any of those things. Thrun's not getting through. Vorinclex isn't getting through. You name it, this is going to keep it from getting through. And it works with a lot of cards that already see play in white decks in Standard. You got like Loran, you got Spirited Companion, you got plenty of things to take advantage of the ETB trigger without building some like janky against odds Panharmonicon deck. It's not like you gotta go super deep and play all these bad cards to try to make ELESH NORN good. It just kind of synergizes with the leyline bindings and ossifications and Spirited Companions you're already playing. I think this is going to have a Sheoldred, close to Sheoldred level impact on Standard. I think we're going to be looking back on this, and this is going to be one of the most played creatures in Standard. It's going to be way overperforming. People are going to be surprised. But I also am the biggest Panharmonicon fanboy in literally the world, so if there's anyone that's going to overrate this card, it's probably me. Crim, what do you think? Talk me down off the ledge. Is it really... what do you think about this one? Is it really that bad?
I don't think it's a great card in Commander. Great card in Commander, right?
That's exactly what people say when they're like, your opinion is horrible, but I'm going to let you down easy. It's a good Commander card, Seth. It's a good Commander card.
Dude, what does this do in Standard? I mean, I could be wrong. I missed the mark on Sheoldred. So,
well, you know what?
Too. I it replaces the owl slot, right? Because in mono white midrange. And but I mean, okay, so maybe mono white midrange can double their ETBs, but does it actually like hurt anything in the Standard format? Like you could kind of like dunk on, I guess, Grixis and their like what the vampire and Wandering Mind and Corpse Appraiser. This actually does body Grixis pretty hard. For at least their creatures.
Grixis can't kill it though. Like Grixis is the deck that has the most targeted removal that can actually deal with it. But you're right, it does shut down a lot of other creatures.
It shuts down a lot of Grixis creatures, so you know what? Maybe it is better than I'm giving it credit for, but I don't think it's like I've seen your list and how high it is up there. I'm not there yet. I just don't. When I think of a lot of the stuff that's going on, it is, like there. It doesn't shut off enough, and Grixis has numerous ways to kill it. That's the main thing. Like it's just straight up hard removal, and you can count on it. When the new edict hits, Grixis is gonna mix some amount of that in there.
That's true. That is true. You could be right. Well, we will see. We're gonna see very soon. It is almost at release time. It's very possible I'm overrating it, but I also just if Sheoldred can do it, ELESH NORN's got to be able to do it too. Sheoldred's another creature that's kind of expensive, doesn't do anything right away, but it is taken over Standard.
Sheoldred does do something when she comes down. That passive is really, really good at like slowly draining, getting you back in the game if you're low in health. ELESH NORN is 5 mana, a turn after, and doesn't do anything at all, and you have to literally wait and hope that you have something that can ETB. Take advantage of that.
I mean, the static does do something right away. I guess it depends on the deck you're up against. It may do something right away. But it might get some decks, but like for the most part, Esper midrange doesn't care, right? Like it doesn't have any ETBs. You look at like the top, like the popular decks, you're only shutting down Bloodthirsty Adversary in the red deck, right? So although a 4/7 is kind of like absurd against red.
Oh yeah, 4/7 I guess is
just gonna block for days. But yeah, it is true that they don't have a lot of ETBs. It hits the most on the other white decks, honestly. Like it hits on a lot of the cards you'd see in the mono white Reanimator, mono white midrange deck. It actually hits on a lot of Grixis stuff, but Grixis can kill it. Obviously pretty good against like Titan of Industry strategies if your goal is to Portal to Phyrexia and Titan of Industry and do like the big Reanimator type stuff. This kind of hoses those decks pretty hard. On the other hand, as you said, Esper doesn't really care. Soldiers doesn't especially care. Mardu, I guess Mardu cares a little bit. You stop some of the Angels, Sanctuary Wardens, ETB, Archangel of Wrath.
Sure.
So it does do something. I mean, I guess we'll have to wait and see. I'm really high on it, but we're going to switch roles for a bit because our next card, Grim, number 5 on our list, this is a card that's kind of the opposite. This one, I think it did sneak in at number 10 on my list, mostly because of you really, really talking to me about this card and kind of convincing me that it's better than I thought it was. But I know you are super high in this one, and that is our new Edict that you just mentioned, killing ELESH NORN potentially. SHEOLDRED'S Edict. Why does this Edict, Grim, actually have a chance to be really good in Standard when really Edicts haven't been that powerful for the most part recently?
This Standard, one card we just talked about, ELESH NORN, and even SHEOLDRED. This Standard is all about just playing one threat, one very good threat each turn, right? Outside of the tokens that are created, like normally tokens like Wedding Announcement, maybe even Fable, all these things would kind of be annoying and get in the way of making you, like, your opponent sack the main threat that you care about. But this card allows, like, the 3 modes on this card are absolutely, like, awesome, right? I mean, let's look at the 3 modes here. So you have target player sacrifices a non-token creature. Then you have target player sacrifices a token creature, and then, or not even target player. Each opponent sacrifices a non-token creature, and then each opponent sacrifices a token, and then each opponent sacks a planeswalker. These are 3 modes that are absolutely busted at instant speed on 2 mana. Just because of the way you're able to get around what would normally protect their best threat. Oh, flood the board with a bunch of, like, pointless little tokens or something. Cool. My SHEOLDRED'S safe. My ELESH NORN's safe. But now this gets around that. This is a really solid removal spell in this current Standard, where there's maybe Thruns, maybe there's a giant dinosaur that has ward. You want to get around Trespasser. You can also get, like, snipe planeswalkers. That's the biggest thing. That 3rd mode means planeswalkers now, I personally think now, the answers that are coming out for planeswalkers means that planeswalkers need, I really feel like this is a monkey's paw curling thing. I think planeswalkers might need a buff if the answers are getting this good. I'm not asking if you enjoy planeswalkers. I'm saying, though, with what the mana investment that you are sinking in, to like all your opponents are sinking 4 mana, 5 mana, maybe even 6 to 7 mana on some planeswalkers. You are spending 2 mana at instant speed. It doesn't matter what they're doing, because almost every time you come up plus EV on this in this interaction. So this card's good in a clunky format.
I mean, I think what sold me on it is the planeswalker removal. I haven't come around on the idea that planeswalkers are not good enough. I think the top of our list, our last 4 cards, might have something to say about that argument that we'll get to in a minute. But I do think the Planeswalker mode, that's what really sold me on this card. When I see this card, I see mediocre creature removal. I don't know. Maybe I'm stuck in the fact that edicts haven't been good in so long. I think the non-token thing definitely helps. You're right that we are a format that's a lot of times about playing one big threat, especially if you can get around the wedding announcements and the other token producers. So I think it's better in this format in most. But when I see this, I see like medium creature removal and then like S tier planeswalker removal. And I think that's enough to make it a pretty good card, especially since Phyrexia OB1 has 10 planeswalkers in it. We have Wandering Emperor. We have a lot of really strong planeswalkers in this Standard. So I think that's the selling point for me. My question for you, though, Crim, is we got a lot of good black 2-mana removal. We got Go for the Throat. We got Infernal Grasp. How do you imagine that playing out in practice? Are you playing like 4 of these, none of those, a couple of each of them? Like, do you have any idea what it's going to actually look like in a deck?
I mean, the meta as it shapes will definitely determine that. Like, there are some big threats like Tyrannosaurus, like Hex or whatever. I don't know what it's called. But
Thrun, yep.
Yeah, Thrun and like as long as
the indestructible mythics too as well, like would be on that list, yeah.
All of the Domino ones, those ones, yeah, Dominus, all of those, all the new planeswalkers. I almost feel that I would do a 3-2 split favoring this and going to like a 2 or if you want, you can go a full play set of this and like 2 Infernal Grasp and or Go for the Throat. And so like I really like this card. I think it's so versatile and it's so good in this format.
Well, let's keep moving on and talk about some planeswalkers that Shieldred Edict might be killing in the near future. Number 4 on our list, we got a new black planeswalker, VRASKA Betrayal's Sting, one of our completed planeswalkers. 6 mana or maybe 5 mana if you want to complete it. And it has a lot of like pretty good abilities. To me, this is like, I've talked about this before, an Omnixilis Reignited Planeswalker, where its modes are all pretty just like generically formulaic good stuff. 0, draw a card, lose life, proliferate, so it's actually a +1 draw a card, with upside that you can add counters to other things. -2, something turns into a treasure, so hard removal for a creature that also gets around like indestructibility, doesn't get around Thrun, but it does get around the indestructibility on the gods. And then the -9, when I first read this, giving an opponent 9 poison counters essentially was kind of like, 9, that's a weird number, that's 1 short of lethal, but there's so much proliferate in the format that it seems like if you actually ultimate this, your deck probably is going to have a way to get that last poison counter and win the game. What do you think about this one, Crim? Like, how good is VRASKA Betrayal's Sting for Standard?
I am right there with you. I think this card is like pretty solid. I look at it as a 5 mana planeswalker. I always complete every one of these planeswalkers or whatever. I take the 2 life. I don't even know why the other stuff is options. But
I like this one at 5 mana as well. Some of the other ones, I'm not a fan of completing them, but this one, 5 mana 4 loyalty, plus it immediately proliferate draw.
Acceptable,
perfectly.
Right?
Oh, that's great. That's great. I absolutely love completing this one.
And like you had mentioned, I think proliferate is actually looking really good. This format, because everything just naturally proliferates. You haven't anticipate that's like, why not proliferate at the end of it, right?
Yeah.
So you wouldn't believe this, but something that I've been discussing with my Twitch chat and all this other stuff is draw, go, proliferate, win the game. like proliferate, control, because it's very, very much so doable. Like you can definitely get 1 poison counter on the opponent. Then you have all the counter spells and the things that are like essentially corrupted, right? Corrupted control, I think would be really good. And there's just points where you can just sit there and do nothing and just proliferate. You remember the old Nephalia Drown Yard way to kill people? Well, this would feel like that, and VRASKA would be somewhere in that.
Except,
so
yeah,
I love it. I think
maybe.
it's really good. It's also good in a mid-range deck. So I think that VRASKA's kind of boring. When it comes, nothing too flashy, but like it is good. And I think proliferate is much better than just +1 draw a card and lose a life, right? So like proliferate, this standard is going to be an all-star because everything is like is going to reward you for proliferating.
I've been doing a little brewing too, getting ready for this. And that was one of the ideas I had too, is a proliferate control thing. And it actually seems somewhat realistic to actually pull off this like draw go proliferate plan. Because like you said, once you get that 1 poison counter, then your anticipates are like sort of dealing damage to your opponent, and your counter spells and your removals. But like everything you do is sort of dealing damage because it's adding poison counters. VRASKA seems perfect for that. Also seems like a really nice Super Friends Planeswalker. That's another archetype I'm kind of hyped for in this standard, because we got so many new Planeswalkers and some good payoffs like the Ichor artifact thing that adds counters. But this is perfect for that, because at 0, proliferate, when you have multiple Planeswalkers, that's adding a loyalty counter to all of your Planeswalkers. Plus, I think you could just play this as like an Omnixilis. Like you could jam a copy or two on the top end of mono black control. I actually think there could be some argument to playing this over Sorin, especially if you're going to start playing like the new demon in the 4-drop slot. You can play Shieldred in the 6/6 demon, and then you can have this be your card advantage Planeswalker in the 5-drop slot, make your curve a little better. So I could see this showing up in some mono black decks too.
I mean, I'd like that. I mean, I'm also a fan of that new Venser because of that, because slowly that Venser comes down early enough to where VRASKA starts proliferating, because that Venser's just 2 mana with Toxic 1. And like this, there's a lot here to reward you for Corrupted. And I think whatever Corrupted deck or Super Friends deck, or as you had mentioned, VRASKA goes in a lot of decks, because why? Every deck is black in some way.
I gotta know, are you on the Drake? This is a little off topic. When I was messing around with the proliferate control, it was Vensers and the 2-drop Drake that when you proliferate, you can return to your hand from the graveyard. Do you think the Drake is worth it in that deck?
The bat?
Or maybe is it maybe it's a bat. Whatever it's the Dimir 2-drop, the Dimir 2-drop that when you proliferate comes back from your graveyard to your hand,
I was thinking about it because it's nice and recursive, but I also like the Myrix, which is a land that just makes a 1/1 might.
Ooh, yeah, I mean...
So, I love Castle Ardenvale. Of course, that was also defensive, and this is not.
But if you're playing Toxic
Myrix
and Poison, then I think it's worth it. That's kind of where I landed on Myrix. Was like, not very defensive, so I don't think most decks will want it. But if you're trying to poison your opponent, then it's actually really good. And it's only 3 mana to activate, so it's actually cheaper than Castle Ardenvale. But
right.
Anyway, let's move on. Number 3 on our list. We're going back to the realm of mythics. We have one Dominus on our list today, and it's the white one, MONDRAK Glory Dominus. This is one of my other favorite cards from the set. It's just Anointed Procession on a 4-mana 4/4 body that can become indestructible. If you make a token, you make twice as many tokens. I think this card has potential to be very strong. So, first off, there's a lot of synergies for it. The go deep plan is you can do ridiculous things if you get Rotodropic going with this, and you're making token copies of this when it dies with Rotodropic. But that's kind of the crazy against the odds do sweet thing plan. We have a lot of token producers in Standard. Fable the Mirror Breaker makes tokens. Wedding Announcement makes tokens. We see soldiers making ton of tokens. We got a bunch of might tokens coming from the new set. We got Jet Mirror synergies. We got Ginny Face synergies, Naya tokens, green white tokens. So there's tons of token synergies. This is perfect for it. And the big problem with Anointed Procession is you're kind of taking a turn off. It has the Panharmonicon problem where you're I gotta take a turn off. I get this enchantment on the battlefield. Next turn, I'm going to do sweet things. MONDRAK, 4-mana 4/4 is not bad. And if you get up to 5 mana and you're playing a token deck, you should be able to pay 1 in the double Phyrexian, sack 2 random Wedding Announcement tokens, and make it indestructible, which is actually pretty powerful. That means it's going to block Shieldred or whatever. It's going to survive most removal. So I actually think this card has potential to be staple level Standard. Obviously, you need synergies. You need the token synergies, but we have so many of the best cards in Standard already incidentally make tokens. It doesn't seem that hard to make it work. But Crim, I'm rambling on. What do you think about MONDRAK?
I mean, yeah, this is probably the most hyped Dominus out of the of the cycle, right? This is the one that, it gives you the body that you want, and it plays very well with everything that you had mentioned. And there are so many token producers this format, so and I'm excited to try it in Naya or whatever Cabaretti. I am super excited to try this in anything that plays a Wedding Announcement. This card is just flat out good, right? It doesn't need to be anything it's wow. It's just good.
The other thing I realized about this recently as I was brewing decks, and this is more of a fringe upside, but it's also a mono white sack outlet. That last ability, you can activate it multiple times, even if you already have an indestructibility counter. So if you are trying to do any sort of aristocrat shenanigans, this is sack 2 creatures for 1 mana and some life, or 3 mana and no life, which I think is kind of a sneaky upside there as well. But yeah, this card, it's going to be so much fun. But let's keep moving on. Number 2, Crim, we got more green cards. We have another Planeswalker, another completed Planeswalker in NISSA Ascendant Animist. This one I'm very curious about. We were just talking about completion. Is this still one that you're slamming for 5 mana and 4 life every time? Or does the double Phyrexian cost, does that change that at all? Yeah, is this a 6 mana, 7 mana Planeswalker? How much do you plan on paying for this NISSA?
What do you mean 7 mana? I'm playing. The weird little scribbly things on the side.
The scribbly things. Yeah.
No. This is a 5 mana Planeswalker. Why would I not play this on 5?
Okay, fair.
Okay. We're making 4/4s, right? The classic Nissa thing to do at 5 mana. She's always made some kind of 4/4 land, anything like that. But then after that, it just starts snowballing. The tokens that Nissa is producing is absurd. So they just get really strong. And -1, sure, no one would pay 5 mana for a disenchant, but you know what? This is a disenchant attached to a body, a Planeswalker that's just flat out gonna just kill people. This will win the game. And when it inevitably gets to the late game, you will just pay 7, drop it down, and if you're a mono green deck, you might be able to just overrun your opponent.
Yeah,
this
and win the game.
Yeah, you're just gonna win the game. There's no way you don't, right? Even if you only have 3 forests, let's just go. You had 3 forests, that's still +3/+3 in trample. So I don't know. I think this card is just very good. It's very Nissa-y, and thank God it doesn't double mana. I'm just I'm happy that I'm unhappy because the card sucks and I hate seeing Nissa because I know that she's going to get played and I'm going to have to play against her all the time. But it is good, and I am going to have to respect it for what it is. This is just a good card.
Yeah, I mean, Nissa's kind of bonkers. It makes the biggest token we've ever seen on a Planeswalker with its +1. Not necessarily the first turn if you play it for 5 mana, but if you play it for 6 mana or 7 mana, it does. And in a couple of turns, it does at 5 mana. And the overrun ability is really exciting to me. I see this as like 7 mana Craterhoof essentially, and I think that's going to close out games. We were talking about mono green, maybe having the pieces to make a comeback. This seems like a great finisher for just like playing a bunch of random green things, and you play this in overrun and win. And don't sleep on that negative one. We saw Vivian Reed, which had a -3 of blow up an artifact enchantment or a creature with flying, which is an upside, but it was a -3, which was huge. That mode actually is pretty relevant, and we're in an incredibly artifact and enchantment heavy standard. If you just look at the best cards, most played cards in the format, near the top of the list, you're going to see Reckoner Bankbuster, Fable of the Mirror Breaker. You're going to see Unlicenser. You're going to see Wedding Announcement. And that doesn't even include when you run into people that are doing like Portal of Phyrexia stuff or just like other big Brothers War style artifacts or Mightstone and Weakstone stuff. So I think that Nissa, it's so good. I really want to be paying 7 for it, but I can see reasons to play it for 5. I will say at 5, 3 loyalty, kind of meh. Like, that's the one thing I don't like. 5 mana, 3 loyalty, but I guess you get 1 loyalty right away and a 4/4 blocker, which is big. But I'm very happy with this at 6 or 7 mana. And the flexibility is nice because there's going to be times when you're just like, I got to play this and just get rid of an artifact or whatever, get rid of an enchantment, get rid of that Fable that's about to combo off and kill me. And this will get the job done for 5 mana. So I think this is very good, but it's not the best card from Phyrexia All Will Be One. It's not even the best Planeswalker from Phyrexia All Will Be One. And number 1 on our list, we have a Planeswalker that's not completed. The Eternal Wanderer. Crim, you love your Planeswalkers. You love your control decks. Why don't you tell us about the Eternal Wanderer?
I mean, okay, I played the living hell out of Elspeth Sun's Champion in Standard, right? And Eternal Wanderer, often compared to that 4 mana white, has a passive, no more than 1 creature can attack the Eternal Wanderer each combat. And then has +1, exile up to 1 target artifact or creature, turn that to the battlefield owner's control at the beginning of the player's next end step. This blink effect in a mono white mid-range is so good. Really good. It fills the curve of mono white mid-range because, yeah, sure, you had Sanctuary Ward and you had Steel Seraph. Great. But this is like actually really good, I think, there. And it comes down and it makes a double strike. It can make a double striking samurai token, 2/2/1, and or it can be a board wipe. This board wipe is so good because, well, maybe things can get underneath the power requirement of Elspeth, but this one, just each player choose a creature that player controls. Each player sacrifices all other creatures they control this way. So you choose their worst creature, and you get to keep your best creature. Everything else goes. With Indestructible, maybe Thruns, if that ever takes off, everything else gets sacrificed. So
a lot of the times that's going to be like, you keep your Wedding Announcement token, I keep my Sheoldred or ELESH NORN or whatever, like Steel Seraph, like some busted thing. Like that's how that's going to play out a lot of the times, which is absurd.
Yeah, and you're not going wide to go around it. And any deck that's playing white's probably playing Wedding Announcement, so there's probably a chump blocker in front of you. So you think about that, and you think of like the other good like decks that are playing white, like Esper midrange probably could throw 1 or 2 of these in there as well. This is really good for the long game. You're able to blink like numerous things if you need creatures and or artifacts. That means your bank busters, right? So reset the counters, draw more cards. I don't know what's not to love about this card. I think it's amazing. And of course, if you play Phyrexian Flesh Gorger, you're playing Esper or something like that, you get to blink that as well. And your prototypes now come back, which, by the way, Steel Seraph, it comes back on its normal form or its full cost form.
Yeah, you get the big version. That's one of the things I'm excited about. I've been trying to make prototype blink work since prototypes came out, and it's been okay sometimes, but it hasn't really gotten there. This card, I think, improves that archetype a ton. As you said, great in just mono white mid-range, any deck like that. And looking at mono white mid-range, they have a lot of stuff that's worth blanking too. Like, you mentioned Steel Seraph, Sanctuary Warden, Ambitious Farmhand, Spirited Companion, along with the Reckoner Bankbuster reset, the Wedding Announcement to give the blocker. I'm also super hyped about this in my ELESH NORN decks. I think this is like best friends in ELESH NORN decks, because you can ELESH NORN and then play this, bling something for value, or Wrath and keep your ELESH NORN, so it's going to work great there too. And its static ability is going to be really nice at keeping it alive. Like, that is a huge upside, that if you are playing against some swarmy style soldier deck or something, or a mono red deck with a bunch of creatures, or just someone that's kind of going off with their Wedding Announcements or whatever, this is not going to just get run over by a bunch of 1/1s or a bunch of 2/2s. This is going to stick around, and you can always Wrath it right away. So I think this card is so good, and we're going to see a ton of this card in Standard. It's one of those Planeswalkers that makes its big impact right away with that ultimate if you need it to, which I think is just very powerful.
Yeah, like coming it down and then just blowing things up right away. You get your best thing, and your opponent keeps their worst thing. Amazing.
Anyway, that's our list of our top 10 cards from Phyrexia All Will Be One. Again, if you want to see the full list from each of us, check them out in the article. I'll link it in the description of this video. Crim, thanks for hanging out and doing it. It's always fun.
As always, I love talking Standard. It feels good. Standard's been really fun, and this set looks really powerful.
Yes, it does. And now that you've seen our picks, let us know what you think. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? What is on the top of your list for Phyrexia All Will Be One in Standard? Let us know in the comments, and we'll be back tomorrow to talk a little bit about Pioneer and Explorer. So until then, have a great day, everyone, and we will talk to you soon.
Peace.